Great. Well, thank you again for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Mariana Islam, and I'll be the moderator. I am the Director of Programs and Advocacy here at the Schott Foundation for Public Education. My pronouns are she and her. Schott is a national public fund serving as a bridge to bring philanthropic partners closer to organizers on the ground who are fighting for racial justice in the heart of our democracy, in our schools, and in our communities. Schott is also home to the National Opportunity Network, which is a growing network of interconnected local, state, and national leaders in the education justice movement. I'm excited to be joined by our presenters today. We have Jitu Brown, who is the National Director of Journey for Justice Alliance, Zakia Ansari, who is the Advocacy Director with the New York State Alliance for Quality Education, and she does so much more. Jorge Diaz, who is the Artistic Director for Argitarte, and also editor of the book, When We Fight, We Win. So before I get started, I want to encourage our audience members to interact with each other and introduce yourselves in the chat box. I'll also be looking out for any of your questions to our presenters there. A helpful tip for our Q&A is that the sooner questions are posted, the sooner I'll be able to organize them for our presenters. If you are tweeting, please use the Twitter handle @SchottFound with the hashtag GrassrootsEd. So I'm going to turn it to Jitu first, if you could get us started. If you could share more about the political and economic context in Puerto Rico and the United States that have created conditions that are hurting students, families, and educators in our public schools.
Yes, ma'am. First, Mariana, thank you and Schott for putting together this important webinar. I think, again, I say this all the time, but whenever those of us that are on the ground have real partners and real support, it means a lot because there are a lot of people working against us. And so it's good to know that we have folks working with us and working in our interest. So I would say that, and Jorge and Zakia, please feel free to inject and add to this. So school privatization is not new in the fight against school privatization is not new in the United States. It is not new on the island. Brave parents and community members and educators have been fighting against school privatization in Puerto Rico easy over the last 20 years. And the efforts that have intensified has been to try to expand the charter industry in Puerto Rico, where it hasn't really gained foothold. So previous secretaries of education, Puerto Rico, like Julia Kelleher, have tried to promote basically scorched earth type of school privatization schemes, such as massive school closings. While Puerto Rico has been, and organizers on the ground have been able to fight back and stop the expansion of charters, they have been hit very hard by school closings. And I'm talking like literally hundreds of schools that have been shut down on the island. But what has happened is a broad-based coalition that has been, I would say, led by the Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico, FMPR, and then really given a lot of life and energy by organizations such as Agitarte, with my brother Jorge, has done a real good job of painting a picture of what school privatization is really about. But after Hurricane Maria, there's been an effort to do similar to what happened in New Orleans, to take advantage of human disaster and the loss of life and the loss of property and the loss of memories and the trauma that causes, to, instead of doing right by the people, investing in the communities, to actually use these disasters as opportunities to privatize. And that is what is being faced right now by sisters and brothers on the island. They have just defeated a measure to expand charters. I believe, and Jorge, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's really only one charter school that's active on the island right now. But that's been the work to not only stop the wave of privatization, but there's also been an attack on FMPR as a teacher union and to go after the pensions of teachers, because that right now is the most organized element to fight back against school privatization. And FMPR as a union has deep roots in many communities. So there's a strong relationship with parents, with students, with other organizers and activists. So there's really been an effort to crush organized labor in Puerto Rico while destabilizing and really destroying education institutions. The last thing I'll say is within all of this, because often when you hear the narrative about those who oppress our communities, the real stories of the heroism on the ground is only learned when we have connections with each other. We can talk to each other and learn. One of the things we know is that it's really been a fierce effort to stop the closing of schools. And actually, many schools have been rescued from parents and community members occupying schools. Remember Mercedes telling me the story of one school that was actually occupied for 165 days. And they won that school being reopened. And so before we go into kind of like what J for J's work and possible to this could be, I just want to acknowledge that, we have a saying in organizing that you can't fake a fight. So we can't go into communities and fight for people. But if in Puerto Rico, there is no faking the fight, people are fighting back and they want their education institutions. So it provides a moment to dream about what education could actually look like on the island. There, and please, anybody else that wants to add something to that.
Well, I think it's important to understand the context and by which school privatizations happen. I mean, it's been an effort that's been going on for years, intensified by the hurricane. But really, the big thrust to shut down schools starts with the imposition of the Fiscal Control Board, which was a measure that the White House under Obama did with bipartisan support to establish a dictatorial board that is over the Puerto Rican government. It's almost like an unmasking of the colonial system that the U.S. has imposed on Puerto Rico since they invaded us in 1898, which for many had shifted in 1952 when there was a crafting of what they called a free associated state. And for many years, Puerto Ricans on the island and the U.S. internationally claimed that Puerto Rico was not a colony. But a couple of years ago, in various court decisions and through these processes, it came about the original relationship, which is, and I'm quoting, Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not a part of the United States. So for us who've been fighting colonization for many, many years, it's a continuation of a long process to pursue decolonization and independence for Puerto Rico. For others who might not articulate themselves as pro-independence, it's about survival, and it's been about how Puerto Rican people can remain on the island in an attack, a massive attack to depopulate the island and really take it over by investors. And as we're seeing now, many Americans with money coming into the island to buy up our neighborhoods, our communities, and take over our beaches illegally.
And I would just say that it's fueled by folks who want us to be divided, and the power in us coming together was that not only in the stories, which is very much how, historically, generationally, we have shared. When someone is coming that's bad in our neighborhood, it's like it's through the stories of knowing what they look like, what they smell like, what they bring into the table, so we know how to fight it, right? And also it's the same folks who fuel the narrative that would have us see dehumanize our immigrant brothers and sisters as well, right? It's that same type of narrative that they push. And so for us coming together was just really an explosion. I know we're going to talk more about that, but I think even in the vein of privatization and everything that was laid out, what's happened in Puerto Rico, like New Orleans, right? These disasters that happen, that we have vultures that come in and try to tear up our communities, is something that's very relatable. And there's other levels of those stories that we had to share, we're able to share and offer as a way to be unified, but also a way to fight back, right? So how is Puerto Rico able to bring, hundreds of thousands of folks on the streets every day, right? And how are we trying to do that here in New York? Like, we can learn from each other. It's not one having more than the other. It's about us bringing our stories together and figure out how are we strategizing and power mapping this crap that's happening to our communities and pushing back and fighting back against it. So.
Thank you for that. And I also remember, Brother Jitu, back when J4J had its, I think, first national convening. I was especially moved by the stories because you all had invited Mercedes to speak, Mercedes Martinez, who is the president of the Federación de Maestros in Puerto Rico, who is going to be joining us, hopefully, if we can work through some technical challenges. But I remember one of the stories that she shared in particular about how teachers have had to put their bodies on the line to keep schools open and turn them into places of relief and support and learning. And you mentioned some of that success. Also want to point our viewers to a great article that Mercedes wrote about how teachers have been critical to the strikes that ultimately culminated in the resignation of Governor Rosselló. So we hope to hear more about that when Mercedes joins us. So Brother Jitu, I want to turn to you. And you know, you and your colleagues at Journey share in such, you know, powerful visionary leadership. You've built an incredible network of advocates in a few short years across the country. Can you share how you've been able to build relational power and how you've been able to unite forces with our siblings in Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's an old African proverb that says the truth is simple, if it's complicated, it's a lie. And one of the things that we share in Chicago, New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, Oakland, Newark, New Jersey, New Orleans, Puerto Rico, is that the basic quality of life institutions that most Americans take for granted, we have to fight, claw, scratch to get the proper services in those institutions. And so the frustration and the misery of having people who are not directly impacted by the policies they set, controlling the basic quality of life institutions in your community, we all connected on that. We know what it's like to tell somebody to get their foot off my neck, but then treat it as if you're crazy for saying, get your foot off my neck. And so when we started talking to each other, we realized that we were going through the same thing. Often policy initiatives that may have started somewhere else were just repackaged and sent somewhere else, right? And so, and also what our children need, we were on the same page. You know, we knew we needed community schools. We knew we needed to get rid of zero tolerance policies, that these policies were targeting our children, right? We knew that we needed more Black teachers in the classroom. And so us building unity was not hard. So that, I think, was as we organized the Journey for Justice, it was really around, as Zakiya said, hearing and validating the stories of sisters and brothers that come from similar types of communities, but then also utilizing the skill that we had within our own ranks as community organizers, people that had experience in building power, and then going with our brothers and sisters and help. And when I say helping, I don't mean in a almost like a charitable way. I mean like locking arms with sisters and brothers and say, let's, you know, and thinking through stuff together, and sometimes doing actions together. And, you know, that work builds unity, right? So that folks in Newark knew that we weren't just talking, right? Mercedes and Jorge, when we connected, we knew that we weren't just talking. There was work that we were willing to do with each other that built a sense of understanding that there's a value system, a belief system that we have in common, right? And so I think that's how Journey for Justice has been able to expand, has been because we've actually, I remember young people in Camden, New Jersey, organizing to get their teacher rehired because they had fired this brother who was is an award-winning music teacher because he was actually creating racial justice spaces for young people in Camden, New Jersey. And the students at Camden called me on Skype or Zoom or something, and we're sitting there while they're occupying the band room, laying out strategy to make sure that they can win that fight. And they won it, right? And so, not because of me, but because of we, because there is a we. And that's, I think, the power of Journey for Justice. We understand, very simple, the way you build a community is you invest in the basic quality of life institutions in those communities. Food production and delivery systems, clothing, housing, education, healthcare, right? The way you kill a community is you destroy those institutions. And so it ain't too much more complicated than that. A lot of people who really like to think that they're smarter than they really are make it a lot more complicated. But when you go to neighborhoods, anywhere on this planet, you go to communities that are struggling, you will often see institutions that are ran by people who run those institutions based on their opinions of the people that they're supposed to be serving. And so one of the things that we believe in very strongly is unity rooted in self-determination. So that's sort of, in my humble opinion, why we've been able to build what we've been able to build up to this point.
Thank you for that. So now we want to talk a little bit about what that looked like. And so, Zakia, if you could share, as a founding member of J4J and a leader within the network, what it meant to build what you're calling transnational solidarity in that political moment.
It's not often you go to a place for the second time and you feel like family after the first time. And so meeting Jorge and Mercedes last year, I think it was the first time. I think we were brought together and having those kind of conversations where, family, when you go to family, Black and brown communities, right, we take you to see the neighborhood, we take you to see other family members, right? And they may not even be blood, but they just like the homies from the block. You get to actually see what's happening. You're not stuck in a hotel, right? They want to bring you where the food, the real food is, right? To give you a taste of what this beautiful place is. In this particular instance, it's Puerto Rico, looks like, feels like for them, right? You get to experience it from their perspective. And it's just something really powerful about that, but also very familiar. Like, I just feel like that we are brought up in those moments to be like that, like treat your family like family, like, and so the second time to be able to go, they was just like, oh my gosh, it's so good to be home. It really did feel that way. It's, it's not not squishy. It really did feel like home. And I look forward to coming back. But even in that vein, there's like these relationships and conversations that we have as J4J when we're strategizing around our platform, right? Because we've had this connection with Puerto Rico, and in my head, I'm always thinking about them as well, right? Like the connections to what they've experienced because we've learned from them, not from the news, not from what someone wants to tell us or what we think we know. We're hearing it from the people on the ground doing the work, right? Which is very familiar to us because that's what J4J is, hearing from the people on the ground doing the work and strategizing with those folks for the solutions, because we know those most impacted by these issues must be centered and creating the solutions, right? And so being able to come there and really strategize in a blink of an eye, which again is back to organizing 101, right? This conference wasn't like, we got a whole year to plan this. No, it was like, what are we going to do? The need was there. G2, Jorge and Mercedes and whoever else came together to figure out how we're going to make this happen, how we're going to raise money for that, because it's a need for our community and we need to get there. And it happened, right? We made it happen. I think all of that is something that's really important just to share, because sometimes people think you need a long time to do things. You need to think this out fully. And I think there's moments for that. But in this moment, it was a need and a call from our family members in Puerto Rico to be like, we need to come together. And we were like, let's make it happen, right? While it doesn't always happen, it did in this particular instance. And then even in those spaces of being part of the conference, it was being in the community. We got to see the school. We got to go into a school that was about to open, I think that week that we were there, the week after we were there, and experience exactly, hear the story. It was almost similar, I always talk about like the lost art of sitting at your grandmother's foot and hearing the stories. It was like that for me. It was hearing from actual educators who had cleaned and swept, who had put their bodies on the line when they were trying to come for this school and said no, right? Who were organizing parents. It was from artists who had used their time and energy to create magnificent artwork to support what was happening because they understood the importance of this fight. They themselves might have had children in the game, but all at the end of the day, we all had skin in this game, and it was around justice. And it was a way to actually hear what was happening. Because in my head, I'm always like, "Oh wow, really?" What I read was it never matches. It never matches the real story on the ground, and it's just a confirmation over and over again. Even as we do it here, I never believe what I read in the press, right? I always have to go to the source, which again is what J for J brings. If I hear something happen in Puerto Rico, I have people I can reach out to be like, is this, y'all okay? One, and two, if that's not right, tell us the truth. It's the same thing I have here. I have that outlet to say, I'm hearing even what's happening in California with the fires. I can check on people to say, are you okay? And what's really going on? And I think that's a missed thing that we in our communities, as we fight for educational justice and a whole host of other justices, we don't necessarily have that national and international and transnational type of relationships that we can actually go to somebody and say what's going on. The other thing we see is that, the people that are doing the privatization, these vulture capitalists and everything else are the same folks that have been here in New York and Argentina and Detroit and all these other places. Like, we know the bad actors and the bad characters, but we just think, oh, they're just in our town. J for J provides that opportunity to say, we know the threshold, the through line of all these. And now we know that these folks are doing the same things in Puerto Rico. So they got the script. We know what it looks like. We came together on this conference to be like, how are we strategizing against this? Share the stories. Really? That's what happened? Right? So New Orleans being able to connect with the folks of Puerto Rico was really valuable, right? To be able to, folks who have been through these disasters, to actually be able to have a deeper conversation. And lastly, I'll just say, in regards to the conference, one of the things that was really powerful for me was, and I said this when we debriefed at J for J, was the centering of women of color. Like how our power of Black and brown women is so centered in everything that we do, from the group that performed Plena Combativa when we opened the conference, who was singing songs that primarily were sung by men, right? To the workshop that Jorge and Suheli did around the artivism and the videos they showed of all the artwork that they have done with others in different parts of the country, but also just in general, and how women were centered in the theater art. And it was just so powerful. To also just the power of the conference we went to, the action we did around the gentrification and Airbnb, right? Airbnb here may seem different, even though I think in some cities, like here in New York City, they're pushing folks out. But we came in solidarity. We came in solidarity to stand with the folks, to stand up against gentrification, because we knew exactly what that was. Again, we experienced that. And the women there, the two chant leaders, were phenomenal. And the woman that led the rally was phenomenal. Those young women chanted for at least an hour. We were there for at least an hour. They were doing it before us. So it was just this powerful moment of centering women and just saying, like, we bad. We are some bad guns. You know what I'm saying? And that's why people are afraid of us. But at the same time, that's why we will rise when we begin to do that more often.
Thank you, Zakia. I couldn't agree more. I heard that Mercedes has now joined us, so we're going to work on getting her on access to audio. But meanwhile, Jorge, I want to turn it to you and talk a little bit about your work in terms of the cultural organizing. And early this year, your organization initiated a social media poster campaign to highlight how teachers, parents, and students have engaged in the struggle to save public education. And if folks follow J for J and Agitarte on Twitter, social media, you can see the amazing art and artists that were part of this movement. Jorge, can you share more about that, as well as the importance of cultural organizing in the movement building work?
Sure. Well, first, we were talking about a campaign that we started at the beginning of the year, which hashtag En Defensa de Educación Pública so in defense of public education. Really, as us thinking, how can we do parallel work, contribute parallelly to the work that the Federación de Maestras is doing, right? It's a teachers union trying to save a bunch of schools, trying to like fight for the rights of students and teachers and communities. And we have other capacities that we can bring to the table. So we initiated this campaign because, as we all know, in the playbook of destroying public education, in the playbook of neoliberalism, teachers are to blame. And this has been a constant narrative and a practice of like the teachers are not good enough, and that's why we must privatize, right? And also the invisibilization of the people who are doing the work on a day-to-day. Puerto Rico has for many, many years has had schools shut down by communities, protests happening all the time, which are completely invisibilized by the media locally and even more so in the United States. So we understood that we have a role to play. We're a movement organization. We've been working side to side with the Federation of Teachers since the 2008 strike, when Agitarte was dormant for lack of resources, through our street theater group, Con Papel Machete. And since 2008, we've been participating in different protests, and they're in deep solidarity during the process of strikes, school closings, and other events in defense of public education. So this was our latest effort, and at first it was just going to be a social media campaign. We have a space here in Santurce. This is a very heavily gentrified neighborhood. We rent a house from a slumlord, and here we host our very humble project. Since we can't really afford a big space, so we turned our space into a place where we can highlight this. And then we did it through social media. If you have, especially on Instagram, you can look for Agitarte Cultural Works, and you will see the whole series of posters. And then we took it to the streets. Like, we actually took these posters, and now the posters are on the streets, and we have used them to highlight, again, the educators and the people who are doing the fight. So when we talk about cultural organizing, we're really talking about organizing. It's just that culture is our entry point. And because we want to be able to make sure that artists can be active. I mean, everybody speaks now to the cultural organizing, but it's really hard still for an artist to come in and try to do his work. And even when it's recognized the importance of the work, it's usually, can you do this poster for us for free? Or can you do this other art? We're brought into the later end of the project, where that's why we also took the initiative to coordinate and organize the transnational encounter as well. You see, like, artists need to be in the center of the organizing, because we can bring a lot. We can do a lot more if we are brought in the process from the beginning. So our group is of artists, but most people are social workers. We have many educators. We have service employees. So people are not necessarily traditionally trained in art, but have become cultural workers and organizers, because we understand the need of shifting culture to be able to do this work. I mean, we're bombarded constantly in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico by default by a dominant culture that is completely against the values that Gito was speaking to. And it's up to us to figure out ways in which we can shift that culture and transform that, not only just to the messaging, but also to these deep relationships of solidarity that we talk about, where we are there with folks in the struggle on a day-to-day, and as Sakia said, breaking bread and going to the communities. So yes, we use nonprofits, we use these funds, we were able to raise a lot of money because we have these structures, but we're really movement organizations, and we're really a political family. And I think that's that we've been able to contribute. And as well, also on a local level, just to finalize, we're also working with one of our local schools, which is down the street, which is the only school for ballet in Puerto Rico, public school. And it's really not because it's ballet, because it's dance. It's the only school accessible for working class girls, even though there's a couple of boys, mostly girls, to be able to get an education in dance. And every year they try to close it down. Actually, Mercedes used to teach there. And we've been trying to model that nonprofit organizations, opposite to what they usually do here, which is to come and drain the resources of the educational system, is to be able to do the opposite, to be able to bring resources. And now we have a workshop with them. We have an urban garden that is actually where we teach agroecology to these young girls, and they're learning how to plant. But we're also talking about how do we defend public education? What is the importance of projects like this? And what is the importance of building community to projects like this, so we can keep our schools open and take education to the place it can of excellence?
So I want to take a question, and Brother Soul from Denver has a question. So it looks like a two-part question here. In what ways can we uplift Black and Brown unification that is happening on the ground in Puerto Rico? And how can we use the shining example as a way to overcome anti-Blackness in Puerto Rico inside of the education justice movement? Any takers on that?
Well, I think it's an election year, so it is a two-part question, but for the broader question of how to support Puerto Rico broadly, it's an election year. Many of you are involved, engaged in pressuring candidates and speaking to candidates, people. We need to get rid of Promesa. Promesa is the Puerto Rico Oversight Management. Oh, that's Mercedes. So we need to eliminate the Fiscal Control Board, and that's something that is within the power of the U.S. government and that Fiscal Control Board, and decolonizing Puerto Rico, because the playbook of education that's been applied here, yes, it's international, but it's specifically the playbook against public education that happens in the United States. So as people in the United States, as people of color, as white folks that have privilege and access, you can't support directly by being, we need to eliminate Promesa, we need to eliminate the Fiscal Control Board, and we need to decolonize Puerto Rico. But Mercedes is on, so I figure I should stop and give a chance for Mercedes to speak.
Yes, please, Mercedes, welcome. And I'm sorry that you're having challenges with this new system. So appreciate you joining us now. And I will save the second part to that question towards the end of the webinar. So we'll come back to that, Brother Soul. Mercedes, welcome. So we were doing some context setting around the conditions that are creating the problems that we're seeing now and the threats to public education, and also wanting to explore with you, how teachers are fighting back, what have been some of the challenges and successes in terms of teacher organizing work that's happening.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm sorry to have interrupted Jorge. I was without the mute button. I'm so sorry. But teachers right now in Puerto Rico have been facing so many challenges. The first one has been defending public education itself, because we say no to privatization, no to charter schools. But what does that really mean? What do we want for public education? What do we want for our students? What do we want for our teachers? So teachers and Agitarte and Jorge and Governor Machete have been wonderful in an alliance that we have made to defend public education in Puerto Rico. Right now, we have beat the Law 85, which is referred to as the educational reform that states that Puerto Rican schools can be privatized and converted into charter in 10%. Only 2 schools out of 856 schools that are currently open have been converted into charter. So that is a big triumph in defense of public education in our country. And it has been because of the people that have defended public education, the teachers of the nation, the parents, our students, obviously, and all the groups that have been involved in this battle. Agitarte, Papel Machete, FADEP, which is a front of Alliance of Teachers Unions. And we are so honored and so happy to know that even though this Law 85 was approved 2 years ago, and it allowed to privatize 10% of our schools, only 2 schools out of 856 have been privatized. And that is because of the battle that teachers and students and parents have given in defense of public education. So it's an honor to me. And solidarity has been an asset journey for justice. The Schott Foundation, all of you that have been here in Puerto Rico, not only talking about privatization, but sharing what you have been living in the state. It's the same story, is a global story about people that defend public education against corporate greed We have right now teachers in Chicago that have been in strike for 10 days defending public education. We have Journey for Justice. We have the Schott Foundation. We have Agitator. We have Papa Martinez. And like that, we can mention so many organizations, unions, activists from the communities that have been defending it. So we right now are in a very happy position to say that even though 10% of the schools in Puerto Rico could have been privatized, the struggle that mothers and fathers and students and grandmothers and the teachers unions gave together with I know was a crucial part of this, and together with so much solidarity with the state have made possible that we have made it become nobody's talking about privatization right now in Puerto Rico. So this is a big effort of so many people that defend public education. And we are just so honored to be a part of it right now, of making the history of our country.
Mercedes, it's been amazing to follow you on social media, in particular, most recently following you sharing support with the Chicago Teachers Union and the important strike that's happening there. So I want to hear a little bit more about how and if you're connecting with CTU, Chicago Teachers Union, and G2 too, if you wanted to speak to that.
Well, as part of the Chicago Teachers Union, right now the Federation of Teachers was on a strike for 10 days. Today, incidents that we are on this call today. Right. In 2008 for 10, when we decided to lift up the strike, I am so honored to call a conference.
Sorry, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you right now. It's breaking up a little bit. Can you try again? And if we're having, yeah, if you could speak up maybe.
I was telling you that the teachers Rachel, and I was so honored to be a part of that. And it's not a coincidence that today is 10 days of the teachers and in Chicago to be 10 days striking, defending public education, defending what's right for the students, defending a salary increase where corporate greed is met every day, but not teachers' needs. So in Puerto Rico, 11 years ago, we were on a 10-day strike, and it reminds me so much. Solidarity has no borders. We talk to teachers every day. Yesterday, we heard that 9 teachers of the Chicago Teachers Union were arrested for defending public education while the mayor, Lightfoot, decided to award CIF income money to Sterling May. And teachers were there saying, hey, our students need this. We need social workers. We need counselors in our schools. We need librarians. Things that you should not have to be on strike for. And here you are, a new re-elected mayor, saying, I cannot give this to you, but I can give everything I can to corporate greed, and that is so wrong. So the Teachers Federation has been in solidarity and will be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from the CTU, for Journey for Justice, that even though it is not a teachers union, has been an active voice in defense of public education for so long. So I am just thrilled to be right now with all of the people that are defending public education against that 1% that wants all for them and nothing for our kids and nothing for our children. The struggle that the teachers are giving right now in Chicago is the same struggle that we are giving right now in Puerto Rico, and I am just so humbled to have been a part, to be a part of this panel right now.
Thank you, Mercedes. Brother G2, did you want to weigh in on that too?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about what are the problems in public education, from J's perspective, we ask a very simple question. Has the mandated Brown v. Board ever been honored? anywhere, right? And so just think about how much trauma has been inflicted on communities that have never received equity, but then have been hit by zero tolerance policies, the rigors of standardized testing before they started closing schools, right? When they would say your school's on academic probation. I just think about all the children that have been negatively impacted going down this messed up path. And then we get the wave of school closings happening all over the country. Places like New Orleans, where the entire district is now charter. New York, where they close over 160 schools. How many young people got bumped into different neighborhoods, got jumped on the way home, got targeted by school resource officers because they didn't have relationships? They closed over 160 schools in Chicago, gutted the system in Detroit, you know, and then how those policies actually reflected in the loss of Black people in those cities. Now, if someone is, you know, saying, where's he going with this? Where I'm going with this is inequity, and accepting inequity is the status quo. And unfortunately, what Lori Lightfoot is doing, despite the progressive rhetoric, is enacting the status quo, which means, you know, allowing corporations to continue to get bloated off the public dollar, while having tolerance for inequity in a city as segregated as Chicago. Chicago is arguably the most segregated city in the United States, where, you know, it's not just about, not only do we live in city neighborhoods that are segregated, access to resources and opportunity is segregated. So we're saying, and we stand with the Chicago Teachers Union because they're actually saying in their union contract that we want a moratorium on charter expansion. In other words, the charter industry is going to stop eating off the backs of Black and brown children. We want 75 sustainable community schools. We want affordable housing surrounding those sustainable community schools, and real affordable housing, not affordable housing, you know, where you're still paying $1,500 a month rent for a one bedroom, like real affordable housing. They are calling for a restorative justice practitioner in every classroom. Real sanctuary schools for Black and brown children, right? So the whole point is they are enacting community demands firmly in the contract, which I believe should be a template for union contracts moving forward. Not because they're doing a charitable act, because the truth of the matter is that it was community power that set the tone for the leadership of CTU to get politicized, the current leadership to get politicized, and to have a sense of what equity looks like, why schools are closing. So this is just about them being just and realizing that those that have stood with us, we're going to stand with them. And so, yeah, I think that, as Mercedes is saying, this is, in my humble opinion, this is not David versus Goliath. There's a fight happening all over this country, and in many spaces we're winning, right? And we're swinging. It's these forces that we're fighting are privileged. They ain't tough. There's a difference, right? And so that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you so much. You know, everyone, your leadership in the movement, your attention to the heart, mind, and spirit of so many, you know, to really rise in action has been amazing to witness, but also gives rise to important calls to action in our philanthropic community. And so for Schott, we can only move as fast as the relationships we build, the trust that we have in place, and the resources that are given to support this work. And so we're asking philanthropy to really lean in closer and faster through conversation and through support. And so on that note, I wanted to get a question in about philanthropy. And for you all, what have been some key learnings or recommendations that you have for philanthropy to support your movement building work?
So just a little background. You know, we have a podcast in Journey for Justice called On the Ground, and Mercedes brought another sister on as a parent and told the story of the struggle for education justice in Puerto Rico. At the end of the podcast, we were asking how can people be supportive, and Mercedes was saying, one of the things we did before is we did a letter writing campaign, and a lot of Journey for Justice organizations submitted letters to support. And then we talked about what about the possibility of actually doing a small anti-privatization conference with your base to talk about some of the solutions that folks have been enacting in the U.S. And it was August 15th through the 18th, I believe. And it was incredible, man. It was powerful, like Zakiya said earlier. I'm going through all of that because after the conference, we talked about next steps and things that we want to do moving forward, like bringing a cadre of educators and parents and students from Puerto Rico to tour sustainable community schools in Chicago. Actually, go to Diet High School, one of the flashpoints of the fight against school privatization in the country, and see how now it is a thriving, sustainable community school because of community, not just community passion, because that's often the most that corporate folks would give us. We admire your passion. It wasn't just community passion, right? It was community brilliance. It was community determination. It was will. It was leadership that resulted in this school now having $16 million in new investments in serving neighborhood children as a level 1+ high school, right? And so we want brothers and sisters from Puerto Rico to be able to visit these sustainable community schools, and then also have a train-the-trainer piece where we actually work with sisters and brothers that want to spread the gospel of sustainable community schools across the island. One of the strengths of FMPR is that they are not a union that stays in the office. They are a union that actually has deep connections in communities all over the island. And so that's an opportunity to actually build on the ground support for the sustainable community schools model. So, and then Adjutarte has the ability to put our vision, the people's vision, in pictures, in images, and whatever's needed. So not only can we tell our story, we can show our story. So we believe that these are some of the things we like to do next. So what I would say to philanthropy is, please do not get caught in the piece of believing that all communities have to offer its passion. People make it often having to be a lot more creative than folks that do have it. And so you have to have faith in the fight, right? Just like there were people that had faith. If you think about this, the basic premise of the school privatization movement that has now, the federal government is the biggest funder of, right, of charter schools, has been parents need more schools to choose from. I mean, just think, that's the basic premise. I haven't heard people talk about, well, we want to focus on project-based learning. We want smaller class sizes. We want more Black and brown teachers in the classroom. We want all the things that we know work. The basic premise of the privatization movement has been, we need more schools, which in my humble opinion is a very unintelligent argument. And so we have to start doing what works, right? And we have to be willing to face our ugly. And our ugly is that we live in a system that is carnivorous towards people that look like me and look like Jorge. And so we have to be different. There has to be a commitment to face our ugly and be different. And the way you be different is you believe in the self-determination of communities that they can fix their own problems if they get the space to do so and the support to do so. And so the harm that's been inflicted, there should be a movement in philanthropy to remedy that harm, right? So, so to me, that's the basic message to philanthropy. Have faith in the fight, right? We are all living witnesses to the power and the brilliance of grassroots communities when we actually are given the space to organize, right? And so that would be my input on that.
Thank you. We have a question that we should probably just spend a couple minutes on but it's from Frank Adamson, and he's asking, what are the key issues and processes for the movement for public education in the 2020 election process?
Okay. Ooh. So, Z, please jump in. So on December 14th, 2019, Journey for Justice, along with Center for Popular Democracy, the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, AFT to NEA, we're sponsoring a public education forum called Fulfilling the Promise, a presidential forum on education equity. And so our education platform, which talks about a moratorium on school privatization, which talks about 25,000 sustainable community schools by 2025, equity mandates in public education for local school districts, which talks about more teachers of color, more Black teachers in the classroom, let me say it explicitly. Talked about the elimination of zero tolerance policies and full support for restorative justice practices and student leadership development programs in schools. Stopping the over-reliance on standardized testing and using multiple assessments to gauge student growth, and the elimination of appointed school boards, fiscal boards, mayoral control, all these schemes that are designed to take away the people's voice. So these will be many of the things that are on our platform when it comes to this 2020 election. And we've seen two candidates that have actually adopted many of our tenets so far, which have been Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, which we're very excited about. But I will say very clearly that, as we say in old school, don't conversate, demonstrate. Don't talk about it, be about it, right? Don't just talk it, you got to walk it. So those candidates and whoever becomes president, our work is to make sure that we have the people power to hold them accountable to the things that they say that they're going to do.
I mean, I feel like based on what Jorge shared in the very beginning, right, we need to go back to those candidates and get them to say, I think, what is the narrative? Get rid of PROMESA, like we don't want it anymore. We need to go back to those candidates and push them to do that. So Network for Public Education is down for that. Let's make it happen. I think as you see, as J for J, we're in different cities and across the country, just like MPE is. And so how do we make sure that we are collaboratively working together with those Black and Brown communities on their local agenda that's obviously connected to the national agenda, but still, like, how are we doing everything we can to work collaboratively to push, you know, whatever's happening locally? I think that would be really powerful. So Jorge or Mercedes, I should speak more about PROMESA, but
I just want to mention, and it relates also to philanthropy, that you all can be bolder. I think that there is a lot of times people are like, oh, Puerto Rico, they need the power to solve the problems. But it is the United States that is creating the conditions that we have. And we rarely see people in the United States, especially people with power, contesting that. And it's almost like a hands-off, like, oh, Puerto Rico, they need to decide for themselves. No, the U.S. can decolonize Puerto Rico, take specific steps. The U.S. can eliminate PROMESA, regardless of one or two reps, Puerto Ricans, you know. So also we're moving beyond respecting, we're moving beyond the identity politics and being like, this is regardless. I mean, you can take steps to decolonize Puerto Rico. You can take steps to eliminate the fiscal control board, and also to not apply the same federal government policies in the U.S., which we need to defeat in the U.S. and also we need to defeat here as a different nation with different needs, even though we understand that we share many of the same conditions and that we build solidarity, because no matter how light you are, we're still a Black and Brown community here, and we're still getting treated like just like Black communities, just like Native American communities in the United States. So I think that even though we'll continue to build solidarity, there are specific takes that the U.S. government can take to make the situation in Puerto Rico better. And it should not be just the responsibility of organizers, but it needs to be people in power, from philanthropy to elected officials, to those of you who have access, entry points. Just sit down, what is your plan on Puerto Rico? And it can be, oh, people need to decide. No, what is the U.S. going to do to change the conditions of Puerto Rico? Even though we need to be part of figuring out what the future is, the attack is not coming from our people. The attack is coming from the U.S.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Unfortunately, we are at time. And so I want to thank our presenters. There are a lot of important gems that we want to lift up. And so we will be producing a blog for this webinar that we will send out to all the participants as well as with the recording. If you are a funder who's interested in supporting Puerto Rico J for J, International Solidarity, I invite you to connect with our friends and partners on this call and to join Schott Foundation to resource this important work. And to stay connected with us for more information on our upcoming webinars, be sure to like us and follow us on our social media and subscribe to our newsletter. We've also posted a number of links to our friends and partners on the call today. And so please check them out, follow them, subscribe to their newsletters as well and their podcasts. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and to my colleagues at the Schott Foundation, thank you.
Thanks to the Schott Foundation for making this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the explanation.